I should have known something was wrong when Richard Langston insisted I wear the burgundy dress. Not the emerald one I had chosen, the dress that perfectly complemented my eyes, but the one he had purchased 3 weeks earlier and left hanging in my closet with a small note that read, "Wear this tomorrow night." At 28, I had learned not to turn everything into a battle. A dress was not worth an argument. Especially tonight. Our engagement anniversary deserved celebration, not conflict. So I yielded. I chose nude high heels, delicate pearl earrings, and neatly pinned my hair, trying to appear light and unobtrusive, not to overshadow his evening. Yet even as I stood before the mirror, smoothing the dress and touching up my lipstick, a sense of unease lingered within me. Something felt offbeat. Richard was meticulous, a man who knew how to arrange every detail. But lately, his actions seemed more calculated than usual, as if I were merely a detail in his strategy, not the woman he had once proposed to. I left the apartment at 6 o'clock in the evening. New York City in early autumn carried a crisp chill, the cold wind threading between the skyscrapers. I hailed a taxi to the Astoria Room, the restaurant where Richard had promised a private and special dinner. The Astoria Room sat on the 20th floor of a luxury boutique hotel in Midtown, with high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and glass walls overlooking sparkling Manhattan. I had been there once, nominated for an architecture award. At the time, Richard had criticized every dish as pretentious and bland, muttering all evening about the prices. Yet this time, he had chosen to reserve a table there himself. As I entered the lobby, the receptionist smiled politely, though her eyes held a hint of unease I had never noticed before. "Miss Blake, your table has been arranged. Your side is waiting. Not your fiancé is waiting, but your side." That choice of words should have been the second warning. I followed the host, heart heavy with anxiety. The restaurant was packed with figures from finance, media, and politics, custom-tailored suits, expensive evening gowns, familiar faces from magazine covers or charity galas. Golden lights reflected off glasses of champagne, lending everything a dazzling, almost unreal glow. Richard sat near the center of the room, in the ideal position to be noticed, but he was not alone. The chair opposite him, the one that should have been mine, was occupied by another woman. Her hair was gently curled, her skin fair, her black classic gown worth at least 5 figures. I recognized her immediately, Madison Worth, the only daughter of the family that owned the luxury Worth Hotels chain. Just last month, she had graced the cover of a major business magazine with the headline, "New York's Most Formidable Heiress." I halted 3 steps from the table. In my hands was the project design I had labored over for nearly a month, the one Richard had said he was eager to see. Now it felt like a slab of concrete. Richard stood, his eyes betraying new emotion. "Olivia, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming," as if I were a business partner, not the woman he had proposed to on this very date last year. "What is this?" "Richard," I asked, my voice calmer than I even expected. He gestured to the remaining empty chair. "Sit. We need to talk." I did not sit. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and leave immediately, to escape this room as fast as possible. But what kept me standing was not hope, but pride. I would not run. Not in front of 200 people, many of whom knew me. Richard glanced at Madison, who nodded ever so slightly, as if forewarned. Then he looked back at me. "I have thought a great deal about the future, about what I need in a partner, especially as I prepare to run for the state senate next year." My fingers tightened around the design portfolio. "Your career future." "Yes. Madison understands the political world, has extensive connections, grew up in the spotlight. She is someone who can accompany me on the path ahead." His words hit me like punches to the chest. I swallowed a bitter lump. "You called me here just to break up with me. I think we both need a clear ending. You have ambition. Olivia, you always prioritize your career. People will say you came to me for connections. You were promoted from assistant architect to lead within 6 months after our engagement. People talk about that." My cheeks burned. "You think I used you, I am merely pointing out how outsiders see it. Madison leaned toward me, feigning sympathy. Nothing personal. Girl, Richard just needs someone who understands the world he inhabits, someone raised in it, not trying to step into it. My hands fell. The design slipped to the floor, papers scattering like a raw wound exposed. Richard did not bend down, not once looking at it. I hope you understand. This is for the best for both of us. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, the engagement ring I had left in his bathroom last week because it was tight. He said he would resize it. Now he placed it on the table like a returned item. Around me, conversations stilled. Phones discreetly came out, flashes igniting within sight. People were recording this moment. Many people. I should have said something cutting, something perfect that would haunt him forever. But all I did was bend down, gathering the scattered sheets, one by one, hands trembling. When I stood upright, I looked him straight in the eyes. Keep the ring. Consider it the price I pay for a year wasted. Then I turned and walked away. Each step felt like sinking into cement. Eyes followed me, mingling pity and fascination. I passed the reception desk. He avoided my gaze. Perhaps he already knew. Perhaps they all knew what tonight really was. I left the Astoria room like a shadow, my heels striking the marble floor with a dry, hollow sound, feeling oddly out of place among the soft music and the muted laughter of the well-heeled crowd behind me. And when the glass doors closed, I was hit by an early autumn wind that cut at my face like Richard's words still ringing in my head. I do not know how far I walked, only the memory of blurred lights, traffic noises that seemed to echo from another world, and a numbness spreading from my hand where I still clutched the crumpled design set. So I turned into a little alley just a few steps off the main street. Empty, except for the street lamps pooling light on damp cobbles and the mist rising from the drains. And I sank down onto the curb, the burgundy dress Richard had insisted I wear falling around my legs like a staining wound. And the first hot tears spilled out. Smudging the mascara I had carefully applied that afternoon, I hated myself for crying, hated that I had given him the full, unambiguous victory. After a year of partnership, after nights of sleepless work revising plans while he prepared campaign speeches, after leaning through gala nights with a forced smile by his side, only to be discarded like an outworn accessory, because I had believed I was his companion and discovered I was merely a ticket. And I do not know how long I sat there until the sound of footsteps on the pavement reached me. But I did not look up, and thinking, let them take the picture. If this is the final act, I have nothing left to lose. Yet the man who stopped in front of me did not raise a phone. His voice was low and steady, like steel wrapped in velvet. Ms. Blake. I looked up through my tears to find a tall man in a long black overcoat, polished leather shoes as if stepped out of an old film. His black hair cropped short, his features chiseled, and what stopped me was his eyes almost black-brown, neither cold nor warm, appraising me as if I were a blueprint under inspection, measuring and analyzing every detail. I do not need help, I muttered, wiping my face with the heel of my hand. I did not think you needed help, he said, standing still, not approaching. But there are a few photographers heading this way, if you would prefer not to appear on social media tomorrow morning. I glanced left and saw 3 figures hurrying from the end of the street, cameras in hand, eyes fixed on their phone screens as if tipped off. I tried to rise, but my legs were numb from sitting too long. The man extended his hand. My car is parked just there. If you want to avoid being viral again. There was no time to weigh options. Instinct told me to take his hand. And when his fingers closed around mine, I felt a strength and precision that chilled me, as he lifted me easily and guided me to a black sedan idling at the curb. Its engine, a quiet whisper, and I slid into the leather interior without hesitation. The car smelling of leather and oak. He sat beside me and nodded to the driver. The car eased away just as the first flash bloomed behind us. I turned to him, still reeling, and asked, "Who are you?" "A man who just witnessed your public humiliation," he answered, his eyes never leaving mine. "And also a man with a life-changing proposal." I laughed. "Horse. I have lost everything: honor, love, career. My life is falling. Not entirely. I think what you might lose is less than what I can provide. But only if you are ready to listen. He produced a business card from his waistcoat pocket. Thick paper with no name. Only a string of a phone number embossed in the center. I looked at it and then up. What is your name? Dominic Russo. The name struck a chord, although I had no ties to the underworld. I had heard of the Russo family, a construction empire with a legitimate face and an influence that swept the eastern seaboard. And people called him the cleanest of dangerous men. Dominic regarded me half in assessment, half in challenge. If you want to turn tonight's pain into retribution, I have an offer: 6 months. A marriage of convenience. And in return, I will make Richard Langston pay a price greater than anything he can imagine. I tightened my arms around the portfolio still pressed to my chest. My world had just collapsed, and yet perhaps another door had opened. And I, Olivia Blake, may have stepped into a far more dangerous game. But this time I intended to set the rules. I do not clearly remember how I agreed. Perhaps it was a quiet nod inside the car, when Dominic Russo looked at me with eyes devoid of pity, yet filled with certainty. Or maybe it was the moment I clenched the business card in my hand and realized that, at last, a clear and decisive offer was worth more than the dozens of empty promises Richard had whispered on late nights. Dominic asked nothing else on the drive back. The car stopped in front of a dark gray stone building in Tribeca, where soft amber lights glowed through the windows, and a doorman in a black suit gave a subtle nod as we stepped out. No flashes, no whispers. Everything was orderly to the point of suspicion. Dominic walked beside me with slow, assured strides. He did not offer his arm like Richard used to do at parties, those rehearsed gestures of politeness meant for display. Dominic simply kept a respectful distance, enough for me not to feel alone, but not close enough to feel controlled. In the elevator, I caught sight of my reflection and startled myself. The mascara was smeared, lipstick faded, and for the first time in months, my eyes did not mirror a woman trying to please someone else. Dominic remained silent until the door opened. "You can stay here tonight," he said, gesturing toward a spacious apartment with high ceilings, dark wood floors, and the faint scent of peppermint in the air. "Tomorrow morning, if you still want to hear my proposal, we'll talk." I nodded, asking nothing. He handed me a key card and disappeared down another hallway. I stood in the wide living room, the soft lighting washing the ceiling like framed dawn light. I took off my heels, placed the crumpled design portfolio on the glass table, and sank into an armchair by the window. The city stretched before me loud, bright, yet from here, perfectly silent, like a painting under glass. I had once believed Richard was part of that picture. Now I knew he was only a replaceable detail. I fell asleep in the chair without changing clothes. When I woke, the morning light was filtering through the curtains and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Dominic stood by the open kitchen, white shirt sleeves rolled up, pouring coffee into 2 gray ceramic mugs. "Black or with milk?" he asked. My voice was husky. "Black. The stronger the better." He handed me the cup and sat opposite me. "No small talk. No pretense. I want you to be my wife." I nearly dropped the mug. Dominic lifted a hand calmly, as if discussing a real estate deal. "Not truly. A contractual marriage. 6 months. You'll be my wife on paper. Accompany me to a few key events. In return, I'll help restore your reputation, perhaps more than that. And I'll take care of Richard." "You want me to pretend to be your wife? For what purpose?" Dominic leaned back, his cold gaze softening slightly. "I'm entering a major partnership, both financial and political. A single man like me is scrutinized constantly. Having a wife, especially someone like you, will stabilize my image and silence a few inconvenient rumors." "And what do I get?" I asked, still not entirely convinced. "You'll have every resource you need to rebuild your career from the ground up. And Richard will never again stand on a stage and trample your name without consequence." I studied him for a long moment. There was something in Dominic's tone that told me he did not make idle threats. And surprisingly, I was not afraid. "Do you have a contract?" I asked. Dominic nodded. a faint gleam in his eyes. I have a lawyer. If you agree, we can start today. I took a sip of the strong black coffee, its bitterness searing the back of my throat. But I did not flinch. I had tasted far worse. Setting the cup down, I met his gaze. I agree, but on one condition. Name it. I won't be just a piece in your strategy. If I enter this game, I'll make my own moves. Dominic's eyes narrowed. Intrigued. Then we have an agreement. And when he extended his hand, I placed mine in his, no trembling. No doubt. A stranger's hand. Yes. But this time, it was I who chose to take it. Less than 24 hours after being publicly humiliated by Richard at the Astoria room, I was sitting in a glass-walled office on the top floor of the Russo Development headquarters, signing a marriage contract with a man I had truly spoken to for barely 3 hours. The contract ran more than 40 pages, written in cold, precise language that made me feel more like a clause than a person. Every condition was meticulously calculated 6 months of legal marriage. No interference in each other's personal work. Attendance at a minimum of 10 public events together. No emotional attachment. No physical intimacy required. Full confidentiality until the end. I read each line carefully. Then signed. Dominic did not blink as he ran a finger lightly along the last line, indicating where I should sign. No smile. No joke. Everything carried a chill of seriousness. When I finished, he nodded at the man beside him, a lawyer with graying hair and a quiet but razor-sharp voice. Congratulations, the lawyer said, gathering the papers. You are now married on paper. I sat frozen, my hands still on the glossy wooden desk. Dominic turned to me. We begin today. Tonight there is a mayoral fundraiser. I want to present you as my wife in public. I almost laughed aloud. No engagement, no wedding photos, not even a staged proposal. Dominic lifted a corner of his mouth. The first hint of something almost humorous. We don't need romance. We need results. I nodded. Half in agreement. Half in bitter resignation. Perhaps I had grown accustomed to love being wrapped in plans. At least this time. I knew exactly the game I was in. Dominic took me back to the Tribeca apartment to prepare. When I entered the bedroom, a large box wrapped in silver paper was already on the bed, containing a sleek black dress with sharp lines, matching high heels, and an exquisite pearl necklace. No noches. No flowers. No message. Only a white card with neat handwriting, 8 o'clock. The car will be waiting below. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time after changing. The dress fit perfectly, highlighting my figure subtly yet without extravagance. I applied light makeup, tied my hair low, my eyes still red but with a completely different gaze. I was no longer the woman from last night. When the car carried me to the Langford Hotel for the mayor's party, my heart raced strangely, not from fear, but because for the first time in months, I felt I was entering a room with my head held high. Dominic stood waiting in the lobby, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit with a silver-gray tie. When he saw me, his eyes paused for a fraction of a second. Then he extended his hand. I placed mine in his. Flashbulbs began to flare as we stepped into the ballroom. Countless eyes turned toward us. Dominic nodded in greeting to a cluster of people near the bar, then turned to me, his voice deep and steady. The press knows about your abandonment by Richard last night. They will be curious why today you appear as my wife. And what will you say, I asked? That I saw you sitting alone, and I would not let that girl go through another night without someone by her side. I looked at him, surprised, but Dominic had already turned, guiding me into the crowd, and then everything felt like slow motion. People turned to look. A few whispered. Some gazes betrayed embarrassment. Madison Worth stood not far away, in a sparkling dress, arm draped over Richard Langston, who raised his champagne glass as if the world belonged to him, until his eyes met mine. Richard froze. He looked at me, then at Dominic. Under the brilliant chandeliers, Dominic gently lifted my hand, placing a kiss on the back of it. No theatrics, no vows, Just a light touch that rang like thunder in the quiet room. I did not need to say a word. Everyone around understood. Richard Langston had lost a woman, and Dominic Russo, the most powerful man in the room, had just left his mark on her right, in front of all of them. We left the party just before 10 at night, after making 3 full circuits of the ballroom, shaking hands with at least 10 of the city's most powerful figures, and leaving behind no fewer than 40 astonished stares. Richard tried to keep his composure throughout the evening, but I could see the tense grip of his hand each time someone came to congratulate Dominic, offering half-joking comments like, "That was fast." Russo. Moving on already, Madison's eyes betrayed surprise mixed with irritation. For the first time in years, I felt I was not a bystander, but someone who had just placed a chess piece at the precise moment everyone else was looking away. As the car slipped through the dimming streets, I realized my heart was still racing. Dominic sat silently beside me, eyes on the window, yet utterly present. No compliment for how I had handled the crowd, no question about how I felt, only a calm stillness, as if everything that had happened was a rehearsal in his long-term plan. I should have found that unnerving. Instead, I found it oddly safe. The car stopped in front of the Tribeca building. The doorman hurried to open the door, his respectful glance neither exaggerated nor casual. Dominic stepped out first, not waiting for me, but not leaving me behind either. He knew I would follow. When the apartment door closed behind us, I removed my shoes and walked straight into the living room, then stopped. For the first time, I took in the place properly high ceilings, exposed brick walls preserved in their original texture, dark polished wood floors, modern furniture that felt sophisticated yet not sterile. There were books, paintings, and small details that gave the space a soul, while still keeping its proud isolation much like its owner. Dominic hung his coat, then poured 2 glasses of whiskey. I accepted mine and sat quietly on the long sofa by the window. "Have you ever lived here with anyone?" I asked. Still looking out at the city, Dominic took a seat on the opposite end, keeping a polite distance. "No. I bought this apartment 4 years ago. Before that, I lived near Park Avenue. It's quiet," I said, taking a sip. "Like a fortress. That was the idea." He replied without looking at me. "I don't like people getting too close. I don't like anyone knowing what I'm thinking." I turned to him. "And yet you married me." Dominic leaned back, eyes fixed on me. "You're not a stranger." "Olivia, at least not anymore." I wasn't sure how to respond. It wasn't a compliment, nor a comfort. It felt like acknowledgement, cool, factual, undeniable. I set my glass down. "If this is where I'm living for the next 6 months, I want clear boundaries." Dominic nodded. "I'm listening. I need personal space. I won't live as if we're a real couple, breakfasts together, commuting together, dinners together. I have my own life. I have no intention of changing that. I'll keep working, under my own name or another company's. I won't be seen as dependent on you. I can arrange a private studio for you. I know some partners looking for an interior architect for a new restaurant chain in Brooklyn." I stared at him, surprised. "How much do you know about me? I know you graduated from Columbia, won the statewide sustainable housing design competition, prefer your coffee black, read crime novels, and use architecture to hide your emotions. You had someone investigate me. I don't marry anyone I don't understand," Dominic said. I soon wavering. A chill ran down my spine. But strangely, I didn't feel violated. I felt acknowledged for once, like someone worth being cautious of. Dominic rose and refilled both our glasses. "Tomorrow we meet Rosa. She needs to know who you are. She oversees most of my civic projects." I nodded. "Does she know this is a contractual marriage?" "She knows enough not to ask." "You trust her?" Dominic studied me for a long moment, then spoke slowly. "I trust that if Rosa ever betrays me, she'll do it to my face." I sat quietly, watching the city bathed in amber light beyond the glass. Dominic Russo lived inside a fortress. And now, I had stepped inside not as an intruder, but as the keeper of a key. Yet I still didn't know what that lock would open. The next morning, Dominic left the apartment at 7, saying little beyond a brief remark that I should wear something professional but soft, because we would be meeting Rosa at 9. That sentence replayed in my head as I stood before the wardrobe newly filled with clothes moved from my old apartment. I chose a charcoal pencil skirt, a white-collared blouse, and a dark gray blazer. My hair pinned neatly back, almost a replica of how I dressed for major design presentations. Only this time, there were no drawings to defend. I was the design itself. The car Dominic sent arrived precisely at 8:45. The driver said nothing. The ride smooth as we passed through the busy streets and turned into the industrial district in South Brooklyn, where old warehouses had been transformed into creative offices. The Russo Development Building, headquarters of his civic projects, sat among a row of red brick structures without a sign. Only a steel door equipped with fingerprint scanners and surveillance cameras. Dominic was waiting outside. He wore a gray shirt, notier, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hair combed neatly but not stiff. For a fleeting moment, I saw not a cold CEO but a man who might once have built the first beams of his empire with his own hands. His gaze swept over me from head to toe. He said nothing, but the small nod told me he approved of what he saw. He led me down a narrow corridor, into an old elevator, and up to the 3rd floor, an open, sunlit space filled with the steady hum of printers spitting out blueprints like a constant undertone of creation. That was when I saw Rosa. She stood before a project board, red marker in hand, marking something on a drawing with focused precision. She was in her early 40s, long brown hair braided loosely to one side, her face bare of makeup yet sharp and intelligent. When Dominic spoke her name, she turned, and her eyes swept toward me like a laser. "So this is the girl," Rosa said, not bothering to hide her scrutiny. "Olivia Blake, isn't it?" I stepped forward, offering my hand. "Yes, it's a pleasure to meet you." Her handshake was firm. "Another Ned. Dominic rarely brings anyone here, and if he calls someone his wife, I feel obliged to verify it." Dominic remained silent. I understood this was my first test. Rosa ushered me into a small meeting room, motioned for me to sit, and laid out a perspective drawing of a mixed-income housing complex. "I hear you're an interior architect," I nodded. "I specialize in optimizing small-space residential layouts." Rosa pointed to a section of the plan. "I have a feeling the design team under-delivered on Block B. The lighting distribution is uneven, and the corridors too long." I leaned forward, scanning the specs before replying. They probably prioritized fire safety standards and pushed the emergency stairwell to the end. But you could still increase natural light by replacing the south brick wall with frosted glass and reconfiguring the bedroom layout to capture indirect daylight. Rosa didn't answer right away. She simply nodded, then asked, "Do you have a pencil sketch? I'll need paper and a pencil." I said. She handed me a sketch pad, and I began redrawing the layout according to the idea. Dominic said nothing the entire time, but I could feel his eyes following the motion of my hand. When I looked up, Rosa was studying me, lips pressed together, as though holding back an involuntary smile. "You can work here temporarily," she said at last. "The empty desk in the corner is yours. You'll get your own computer. I'll send over the detailed schematics for Block B." I nodded, unable to hide my surprise. Dominic raised an eyebrow. "You don't mind I told you I don't want to depend on you?" Dominic nodded slowly, faintly pleased. Rosa stood, passed by me, and tapped my shoulder lightly. "If Dominic trusts you, I'll observe. If I trust you, you'll know." The words carried both challenge and invitation. As Dominic led me out of the office, I asked quietly, "Who is she to you?" His reply came without turning around. "My left hand, and sometimes my shadow." In that instant, I understood that in this world, trust was never given out of sentiment, but earned through proof. And today, I had just passed the first doorway in the long corridor Dominic Russo was beginning to unlock. 3 days after meeting Rosa, I stood before the full-length mirror in the dressing room of the Waldorf Astoria. making the final adjustment to a sapphire blue evening gown that clung to my figure, its back plunging to mid-spine, and its train pooling softly at my feet. Dominic had not explained what the event was, only left a box in my room with an invitation card and a brief note containing 2 words, begin. I had grown used to his concise and precise directions. Dominic never wasted words, yet each one fit perfectly into a chain of pre-calculated moves. Tonight's gala was hosted by the New York City Urban Renewal Fund, where real estate magnates, politicians, architects, investors, and the media swarmed like bees to honey. Dominic was one of the primary sponsors. I was his wife. When I descended to the lobby, he was already waiting this time, not just impeccably dressed, but radiating a presence that seemed to make the entire room yield around him. The black tuxedo, complete with a traditional bow tie, made him look like a man stepped out of a black and white photograph from the 1950s, though his eyes were entirely modern, sharp, alert, calculating. When his gaze landed on me, I saw the faint tightening of his lips, something between surprise and approval. He approached, gently lifted my hand, and pressed a kiss to my palm. Neither of us spoke. Yet, in the doorman's glance as he opened the car door, I saw it clearly. We had succeeded in creating the illusion of a flawless couple. The grand ballroom glittered like a universe of crystal. Massive chandeliers hung above, and the sound of a classical piano floated through the air like the steady breath of an upper echelon gathering. As the host introduced the sponsors, the great doors opened. Dominic's hand rested lightly against my back, so light I could barely feel it, yet firm enough to guide me. Every head turned. I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, and among them, I saw Richard. He stood beside Madison, holding a glass of wine, smiling with his mouth while his eyes darkened at the sight of us. I didn't look away. I lifted my chin and smiled faintly, as if he were nothing more than a turned page in a book I had already closed. Dominic didn't need to perform. He merely existed. And that was enough. We were introduced as the Russos, a phrase that echoed through the hall like a soft but resounding strike against every lingering rumor outside. After the mayor's speech, Dominic took the stage. He spoke briefly and clearly, emphasizing the importance of sustainable urban design and Russo Development's commitment to affordable housing over the next decade. He never mentioned me, never alluded to anything personal, but when he returned to our table, he leaned toward me and said quietly, just loud enough for me alone, "Your presence made them see me differently." I turned to him, keeping my composure. So I played my role well. Dominic didn't answer immediately. He touched my wrist lightly, a silent punctuation that said more than words. Better than I expected. As dinner was served, the atmosphere softened. I found myself discussing inclusive design in public spaces with a young congresswoman, then fielding questions from a major investor curious about integrating community libraries into social housing developments. What I had assumed was a performance revealed itself as opportunity. Dominic didn't interfere with my conversations, he simply listened, occasionally adding a precise remark that made others reconsider my standing beside him. I was not a decorative accessory. I was a woman he had chosen to stand with. Near the end of the night, I stepped out alone onto the balcony. The city stretched beyond, 1,000 lights shimmering like a restless painting. The evening wind brushing the hem of my gown. Richard appeared. No Madison. No wine glass. Just the man who once thought he could position me like furniture to suit his taste. "You're playing a dangerous game, Olivia," he said, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. "You know who he really is, don't you?" "I know he's the only man who doesn't see me as a stepping stone," I replied, still facing outward. "What about you?" Richard was silent, then let out a small laugh, the sound of someone realizing too late that power had slipped through his fingers. "Don't fall for him. Don't think he'll choose you when the game ends." I turned to him. If this is a game, at least this time I chose my seat at the table. I left him standing there and walked back into the ballroom, where Dominic was waiting. He extended his hand. I placed mine in his not because I trusted him completely, but because, for the first time, the choice was mine, and I chose to keep walking. even if it meant stepping straight into the lies I had yet to see. The morning after the gala, I woke in the Tribeca apartment to sunlight slanting through the sheer white curtains, tracing fine veins of light across the ceiling. I was still wearing the gown. The scent of last night's perfume lingered faintly on my wrist, along with the memory of Dominic's hand at my back as he guided me from the ballroom, silent yet resolute. We hadn't spoken much on the way home. Dominic had merely said, "Everything is in its place," and "You did exactly what you needed to do." I hadn't asked for more. Sometimes his silence carried more weight than 1,000 affirmations. But this morning, the aftershocks began. When I stepped out of the bedroom, my phone already held over 30 unread messages. Half were from former colleagues who suddenly recognized me in the photographs flooding the internet from the night before. The rest came from strangers who felt entitled to judge, asking if I was using Dominic Russo, or if this was simply a clever way to get back at Richard. I locked the screen and walked into the kitchen, where Dominic was pouring coffee. He was already dressed in a white shirt, Gratia Lucend, jacket draped over a chair. He always looked like a man who'd mapped out the next 30 days in advance. "The media's reacting," I said, taking a seat. Dominic slid a newspaper across the table. On the front page was a photo of us hand in hand at the gala. The headline in bold: Russo's secret weapon, the woman behind New York's new real estate power. I lifted my cup, took a sip, then set it down. A weapon. Dominic glanced at me, his expression carrying a flicker of irony. "They need a story. You gave them one no one saw coming. No one expected Dominic Russo to get married, least of all to you. Someone outside the circle, without pedigree or political ties. You don't need to remind me of that," I replied, my tone dry. Dominic was silent for a moment before saying, "I meant that they can't control you. Olivia, that's why you unsettle them." I looked at him then, and for the first time saw something behind his eyes. I couldn't read, not anger, not coldness, but a shadow without shape. He took his jacket and moved toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. "This afternoon you'll have a photo shoot for City Influence. Rosa's scheduled it with the stylist. They'll arrive at 3. "Do I get to choose how I'm portrayed?" I asked. Dominic nodded, without turning back. "You can choose everything. Just remember, every choice has consequences now." The door closed behind him. I sat for a long while, watching the steam rise and fade from my coffee. Each step forward was part of a larger design, and I was beginning to realize I was no longer simply following Dominic's plan. I was starting to rewrite it. But the aftershocks weren't just from the press. Around noon, an email arrived from my former architecture firm, the one I had left after Richard suggested I take a break to avoid a conflict of interest. They wanted to meet about a new public library renovation in Queens. Partly, they were facing criticism over the lack of women in leadership. Partly, because now, I was Dominic Russo's wife. I stared at the screen, then typed my reply. I agreed to meet, but requested that my husband's name not appear in any publicity materials related to the project. If they wanted me for my skill, I would stay. If not, I would walk away. The most unexpected aftershock came from my mother. She called in the late afternoon. She didn't ask if I was all right after the broken engagement. She said only one sentence. "If you're happy, I'll support you, but don't let anyone else write your story for you." I said nothing. My mother was never one for sentiment. Yet this time, her words felt like an embrace over the phone line. When I hung up, I stood, gathered myself, and began preparing for the photo shoot, because from today onward, every camera angle was part of a larger war of images, and I would no longer be the one trapped inside the frame. The photo shoot for City Influence took place in a Soho studio flooded with natural light from tall windows, every element arranged to make me look like the most polished and powerful version of myself. I wore a sharp white suit, hair swept into a high bun, standing before the lens with the expression the photographer called still but dangerous. After 2 hours of posing, adjusting angles, and changing backgrounds, they finally captured the image Rosa would later describe as a strategic media weapon. I called it a mask. On the ride home, a message appeared on my phone from an unknown number. No greeting, no name, Just 3 words. Watch your back. I read it again and again, trying to decide whether it was a bad joke or a genuine warning. The second message followed moments later. Dominic isn't the only one with a plan. My breath caught not from fear, but from instinct. Someone was watching. Someone knew more than I imagined. I replied with a single word, who no answer came. I saved the number under the name Anonymous and forwarded the messages to Rosa. Within 5 minutes, she called. "Where are you?" Her voice had lost its usual composure. "On my way home." "Is something wrong?" "Don't go back to Tribeca. Redirect to the Brooklyn office. Dominic's waiting." "Is someone following me? Just do as I say." "Olivia, don't turn. Don't stop." I told the driver to change course, asking no further questions. When I entered the Russo Development office, Dominic stood before a blueprint of the Red Hook district. Sleeves rolled. Expression hardened. He turned as he saw me, but didn't move closer. "Someone sent me a threat," I said flatly. "I know. And you didn't call. I was tracing the source. Rosa's tracking it." The message came from a burner device. Unregistered. Pinged near Flatbush. Then shut off after 2 minutes. "So someone warns me that I'm not safe. And you think investigation is enough?" Dominic stepped closer, his eyes darkening. "Olivia, this isn't the first warning I've received, but it's the first time they've reached for you. That changes everything." I clenched my fists. "Who is it, Richard?" "No. He wouldn't risk that. But someone may think you're the weakest link in my plan." "Then they're wrong." Dominic studied me for a long time, as though measuring the depth of a wound. "I'm not sure you understand how complicated this world really is. Olivia, I don't need to understand it all. I just need to know that if someone comes close again, I'll have a way to defend myself." He was silent for a beat, then opened a drawer and produced a small black box. Inside lay a device that looked like a keychain. "Panic button. Keep it with you at all times. Press it, and my security team within a 3-mile radius will be alerted. They'll reach you in under 5 minutes. I held the device, the cold metal biting into my palm. For the first time, I realized I had stepped into the gray zone where the line between the dangerous and the more dangerous no longer existed. Dominic came closer and placed a hand gently on my shoulder, a gesture unexpectedly tender. Unplanned. "I won't let anyone touch you." I looked up at him, my voice low. "You say that like it's written in our contract." "It isn't," he said. "It's the part I never had time to write." I said nothing more, but when I left the office that evening, I knew one thing with certainty. The echoes of those messages wouldn't stop at a few warnings. They were the first knock at the door of something much larger. And I, Olivia Blake, would have to be ready, because this time, I wasn't just the wife of Dominic Russo. I was becoming the threat to those who wanted to bring him down. That night, Dominic did not return to Tribeca. Rosa texted to say he had an emergency meeting with partners from Chicago and might stay at the office overnight. I knew that wasn't entirely true. Dominic Russo never stayed at the office when he could control everything remotely. He needed time to do something without me seeing, and that unsettled me in a way I couldn't quite name. For the first time since moving in, I stepped into his study. It wasn't locked. It wasn't forbidden. Yet every object inside was arranged with such deliberate precision that I felt like an intruder. On the desk lay a picture frame face down, and that small irregularity drew me in. I lifted it carefully. A girl, about 8 years old, with chestnut curls, stood beside a woman whose eyes were almost identical to Dominic's, while Dominic himself, thinner, younger, and far less guarded, stood behind them, one hand on the woman's shoulder, the other holding the girl's hand. None of them were smiling, yet their eyes carried a quiet peace that must have once existed. I didn't know why Dominic kept the photo hidden, but I placed it back, face down, exactly as it had been. Part of me wanted to ask. Another part was afraid to know. The next morning, Dominic returned around 7. He looked tired but composed, still in his dark suit. Tea loosened. I was making coffee when he stepped into the kitchen, his gaze brushing over me without pausing. "You all right?" I asked, unable to mask the curiosity in my tone. I'm fine. Just a few meetings that needed attention. And the threats Dominic took, the mug I'd just poured, sipped, and finally said, "They weren't aimed at you. They were warnings meant for me using you as leverage. Then don't let me be leverage." Dominic looked up, for the first time showing a flicker of something between gravity and confusion. No one chooses their weakness. "Olivia, it comes from what we can't let go of." I stayed silent, because I understood that feeling better than he realized. We said nothing more until he left. But that afternoon, it was Rosa who handed me a piece of the puzzle Dominic had tried to keep hidden. She invited me to a small cafe near the office, no staff. No security. Just two women who both knew that some secrets couldn't stay buried forever. "How much do you know about Dominic's family?" she asked once we sat down. "Not much. I saw a photograph. That photo is all that's left. His mother died in a car crash when Dominic was 14. His sister Julia was severely injured. Underwent more than 12 surgeries before she passed 3 years later. Dominic was the only one left physically unhurt. But inside, everything broke that day. My hand went cold around the cup of tea. And his father gone. A failed businessman. Drowning in debt. Alcohol. And gambling. After the accident, he left New York, leaving nothing behind but enormous debt. Dominic sold everything his mother had left to pay it off, and built himself up from nothing. I looked at Rosa, my chest tightening, and Russo development. It was his promise to Julia. She once drew a picture of a perfect neighborhood, children with playgrounds, adults with libraries, everyone living in spaces filled with natural light. Dominic still keeps that drawing. I thought of the blueprints I had seen spread across Rosa's desk. Now I understood why Dominic demanded such impossible precision for every window, every shared courtyard. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked quietly. "Because if you truly intend to walk beside him, you need to know. Dominic doesn't trust people because everyone he ever loved was taken from him. You're the only one he's let inside the wall." I returned to Tribeca with a heaviness in my chest. Dominic bore no scars on his skin, but inside him were wounds that had never healed. I went into his study and opened the small drawer on the left side of his desk. The child's drawing in colored pencil was still there. Julia had drawn a house with large windows and scrawled beneath it, in crooked letters, "Home is where no one leaves anyone behind." I folded the page gently and placed it back in its envelope. When Dominic came home that evening, I didn't ask a single question. I simply handed him a cup of hot tea and sat across from him in silence. Because sometimes, silence is the only way to tell someone that you see the scars they try to hide, and you choose to stay anyway. 4 days after I learned about Julia's drawing, Dominic summoned me to his Brooklyn office without warning. When I arrived, the desk was covered with project files, papers scattered across its surface, and an unfinished architectural draft filled with faint, uncertain lines. Dominic didn't look up at first. He was turning through documents with the focus of a man tuning a string pulled too tight. Rosa stood near the window, arms crossed, her expression shadowed, as if something was unfolding that I had not yet earned the right to know. When Dominic finally lifted his head, he gestured toward the plans on the desk. "This is the Red Hook lot. We're about to announce a mixed-use housing project there." I pulled out a chair and studied the layout. Something was off. The zoning was odd. The central courtyard sliced in half by a 4-story commercial block, and the natural light orientation didn't match the standard blueprint Rosa had once shown me. "Who drew this section?" I asked, pointing at the irregularity. "That's the problem," Dominic said, his voice lower than usual. "I never approved this design, but it was just leaked to an international investment group under the Russo development name." I glanced at Rosa. She gave a brief nod. "That's how they test the waters. If we react, it means the design holds value. If we stay silent, money starts to move." Dominic turned another page and handed me a scanned email that had been stolen from an internal system. The sender was a junior architect I'd met only a few times, a man named Carter Hughes. But what made my stomach drop wasn't the name. It was the note attached to the file, revised concept based on sketch by Julia R. I looked up at Dominic. He said nothing, just gave a single, quiet nod. Someone was using his sister's design. a drawing seen by only 3 people in over 2 decades as bait to lure him into a financial trap. How do we respond, I asked. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on me as if gauging whether I understood that this was no longer a matter of architecture but psychological warfare. We'll play their game, he said. But by our rules. Rosa stepped forward and opened another folder. You'll redraw it, she said. But leave a few subtle technical flaws, mistakes only a real professional would notice. Then we'll let it accidentally leak. Just as they did with the first one. He hesitated. You're using your sister's design as bait. Dominic shook his head. I'm using my pain to expose whoever's trying to turn it into profit. And I need you to be the last person to touch that drawing. I looked down at the faint lines, imagining little Julia, the girl with eyes so much like her brother's sketching with her colored pencils. I nodded. I'll do it. But on one condition. Dominic's gaze sharpened. What condition when this is over? Julia's original drawing will go to the city's architecture museum. She'll be recognized as the inspiration behind this project, not hidden, not erased. Dominic was silent for a long time before saying, his voice slightly rough, she'd be proud of you. I began redrawing that same afternoon. Every stroke was both a disguise and a message to whoever was watching us from the dark. Dominic tightened every security measure. But he knew, as I did, that the information would leak because he wanted it to. He was laying the bait. And I, the hand that drew the lines, was setting the trap. In the moment I pressed the final stroke onto the page, I understood something with absolute clarity. The only thing stronger than pain is the will to turn it into a weapon. A week after I completed the forged blueprint, Dominic staged an internal presentation at the Red Hook construction site, under the pretext of updating progress with strategic investors. The event was private, no press. No media, just 8 people on a guest list that included 3 figures from the international investment group that had shown particular interest in the design of Julia R. Rosa and I stood side by side on the edge of the cleared lot. Once an old warehouse now leveled to bare ground. Dust coated our shoes. But I stayed still, clutching the folder as if waiting for a cue. Dominic wore a gray shirt. Notie. His expression calmer than I had ever seen it. He stood at the center beside a newly mounted presentation board, pretending to discuss lighting orientation, though I knew this was all theater. From the projector's placement to the late afternoon sun slicing through the air, to the red-painted section he gestured toward every detail was choreographed. And my part was to flip the switch. When the time came, Dominic turned slightly toward me and nodded. I pressed the button, and the screen lit up with the counterfeit design I had drawn. As planned, one of the investors, a man of Italian descent named Alessandro Ricci, immediately leaned toward his associate, whispered something, then raised his hand. Mr. Russo. This version seems a bit different from the one my team received last week. Can you explain? Dominic smiled faintly. Unshaken. That's exactly why I invited you here today. It seems there's been a misunderstanding. The design you received was never official. Ricci arched an eyebrow. Then where did it come from? Rosa stepped forward, holding a thick envelope. We traced the data trail, she said evenly. The leaked file was never stored in Russo Development's main system. But it matches almost perfectly with a private sketch that was never meant to leave our internal archive, which means someone deliberately stole it. Ricci's face stayed composed, but I saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. Are you suggesting industrial espionage? Rosa said nothing. She opened her laptop and projected security footage. A man in a gray jacket and baseball cap entering the records room at 313 A.M. A time accessible to only 4 people. His face was hidden, but his height and gait matched Carter Hughes. Ricci shifted in his seat, his composure cracking for the first time. Dominic stepped closer. And here's the interesting part, he said. That fake design contained a deliberate technical flaw, something only a true professional would notice. But in the investment proposal your firm submitted to my finance division, the attached blueprint conveniently corrected that exact flaw. The air froze for 2 full seconds. Ricci gave a small, soundless laugh. So this was a test. Then Dominic's gaze sharpened like a blade. No, this was a trap. and you just walked into it. At that moment, 3 men stepped through the outer gate, badges of the New York Bureau of Economic Investigation gleaming under the sun. Rosa leaned toward me and whispered, "We've been coordinating with them since the first doctored file surfaced." Ricci was handcuffed on the spot. One of his associates bolted. The other stood shaking. Dominic never looked back. He turned to me, eyes shadowed with exhaustion for the first time. "Thank you for drawing an imperfect design." My lips trembled, but I held steady. Sometimes it's the crooked lines that reveal who's looking too closely. The staged performance at Red Hook ended as quietly as it began. Police cars rolling away into the dusk. The counterfeit blueprint, having served its purpose, as Dominic and I walked toward the car. He didn't take my hand, but just before opening the door, he leaned close and said softly, "You're no longer the bait. Olivia, you're the architect of the trap." And the world just saw it. The next morning, I woke to the shrill sound of a phone that wasn't mine. Dominic's lay on the nightstand, its screen lighting up over and over with names that needed no explanation. Rosa, Legal Affairs, Crisis Communications, and a string of internal numbers from the city's finance bureau. I was still half awake when Dominic stepped out of the shower, shirt half buttoned, droplets of water sliding from his hair down his neck. He looked at the phone, then at me, and said quietly, his tone steady but charged like a live wire, "The trap has started to spring." I sat up, pulling the blanket around me. "You mean Red Hook has leaked?" Dominic shook his head. "No. The people behind Ricci are striking back." He handed me his tablet. The morning's financial headline glared in bold letters, "Russo Development accused of manipulating investment files' authenticity of design under question." The article quoted an unnamed source claiming that the drawings used during the Red Hook meeting did not match those sent to investors, implying that Dominic and Rosa had orchestrated the event to sabotage rivals. Reading it felt like being punched in the chest. Dominic dialed Rosa. She answered on the 4th ring. "They've begun," he said flatly. "I know," she replied. "The leak came from an account in Panama. My tech team's tracing it. But it looks like it was prepared even before Red Hook happened. They knew we'd make a move." I whispered, the chill spreading through me. "Not only knew they planned the exit route," Dominic said, ending the call. He turned to me. "Do you still have the original design?" "Yes. And Julia's hand-drawn file. Give them to me. We're going to use them." "You mean publicly, there's no other way?" I went to the study, opened the safe, and retrieved the leather envelope. The paper still carried the scent of age, and the soft creases of a child's hand. Dominic took it as though holding a part of himself. Eyes shadowed but grip steady. "I'll release it," he said. "To the press. To the city council. They need to know who truly owns this idea. And if they don't believe you," Dominic's hand tightened on my shoulder. The first time he had ever held me with real force. "Then we let the truth defend itself." The press conference took place Monday morning in the Grand Hall of New York's City Hall. More than 30 journalists attended, along with housing advocates and public officials. Dominic spoke without notes, beginning with the community vision for Red Hook, then detailing the risks of stolen and manipulated intellectual property. Finally, he lifted Julia's drawing and held it beneath the lights. Silence filled the room. The childish lines, the uneven handwriting, yet unmistakably the foundation of everything Russo Development had built. "This was the first sketch," Dominic said, his voice deepening. "It was drawn by my sister, Julia Russo. When she was 12, she's gone now, but her idea lives in every project I've touched. And when someone tries to steal that, they don't just insult me, they desecrate the memory and dream of a child who never got to grow up." The room was utterly still. Rosa presented the technical evidence next, showing the digital trails that exposed the forged file. My name, Olivia Blake, was cited as the architect who helped reconstruct the original and detect the discrepancies. I didn't speak, but I stood behind Dominic until the end. When it was over, reporters surged forward, flashes igniting the marble walls. Yet Dominic simply took my hand and led me through the chaos without a word. In the car, he remained silent until we pulled up before the Russo Development headquarters. Then he turned to me. gaze long and unwavering. The trap is shut, but they won't stop. Then neither will we, I said, meeting his eyes. Dominic smiled faintly, the first in days. Welcome to Phase 2. And as we stepped out into the morning light, I knew with absolute certainty that this was no longer about reputation or wealth. It was about justice. And for the first time, I felt I wasn't just walking beside Dominic Russo. I was helping him rebuild something larger than both of us, the truth that had been buried too long. 3 days after the press conference, when public opinion began to turn and suspicion shifted toward Ricci and his shadowy investors, I received a call from an unknown number at 10 o'clock that night. Dominic was out meeting with Rosa, leaving me alone in the Tribeca apartment. The man's voice on the line was low and trembling, as if carrying something too heavy for him alone. "Is this Olivia Blake?" I answered curtly. "Yes. I need to talk. Not over the phone. It's about the drawing. About Julia, and about Dominic." I was ready to hang up, but that last name stopped me cold. "Who are you?" "My name is Carter Hughes." I shot to my feet. The name, the shadow in the surveillance footage. The man who had betrayed Dominic. "I have no reason to trust you." "No. You don't," he said, his voice cracking. "But Dominic will understand. Just listen. I don't want money. I just want out." We met the next morning in a small cafe in West Brooklyn. One without cameras and with few early customers. Dominic didn't know. I didn't tell him. Maybe because, for the first time, I wanted to see a piece of his past without his armor between us. Carter arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a worn jacket, eyes sunken, hands shaking around a cup of coffee. He didn't look at me when he began to speak. Eyes fixed on the table, as if afraid his story might swallow him whole. "I used to work for Dominic 6 years ago. Before moving to the secondary design team, I was one of the first 3 people who ever saw Julia's sketch." My fingers tightened under the table. "You stole it." "No." Carter shook his head, voice breaking. "I photographed it. I thought it was cute. A little inspiration. But later, when I got into financial trouble, a man named Louis Monroe approached me. He wasn't from the industry but had ties to a European laundering network, and he knew about Julia. He knew about the drawing." How I asked. Carter was silent for a long time before he finally lifted his gaze. Eyes bloodshot. Because he was once close to Dominic's father, the father who abandoned him after the crash that killed his mother and sister. Louis knew everything, even the truth that Julia didn't die from her injuries. She died because of the man's neglect. Dominic has never told anyone. But Louis knew, and he used that pain to control him. I couldn't breathe. Everything I thought I understood about Dominic, his distance, his restraint, the sorrow behind his composure suddenly had a deeper root. "So you were coerced?" "At first? Yes. Then I got pulled in deeper. They offered money, recognition, a way out, and I stayed silent. I let Dominic believe Ricci was the core, but Ricci's just a middleman. Louis is the one pulling every string." My voice dropped to a whisper. "Why tell me now?" "Because I saw you stand beside him without fear. I saw the way he looks at you. No one's ever gotten that close to Dominic Russo. You're his only chance not to become his father, cold, faithless, hollow." I left the cafe in silence. Dominic wasn't home yet. On his desk, I left a note with one line. "You need to tell me the truth. Not about the past. About Louis." He came back close to midnight, finding me waiting at the dining table, the warm light turning every line on my face into quiet resolve. He didn't ask how I knew. He simply sat down, fingers interlocked. Louis Monroe destroyed what little was left after Julia died. 3 years later, he came to me with photos. Hospital records. The report said that if my father had taken her to the hospital 20 minutes earlier, she might have lived. "You've carried this alone all these years," I asked. "Because if I told you, you'd look at me differently, and I couldn't bear that." I took his hands, no hesitation, no caution left. "No, Dominic, I'd look at you the way someone does when they've learned to forgive themselves. Now it's your turn." In that moment, Dominic Russo was no longer the powerful strategist. no longer the man who planned every move. He was just a brother who had lost his world in one night and was finally learning to trust again. And I, Olivia Blake, chose to stay when the truth had nowhere left to hide. 3 days after that conversation between Dominic and me, the air inside the Tribeca apartment still felt heavy, like morning fog that refused to lift. Dominic spoke less now, or rather, his silence had grown deeper. He wasn't avoiding me, but I could sense the fractures within him shifting, like a stone wall slowly being worn through by rain. After confessing about Louis Monroe, Dominic gave Rosa full authority to re-examine every contract tied to the Ricci Group from the past 6 years. The system shook. Several projects were suspended. Personnel were audited. Dominic no longer hid anything. He let people see an imperfect version of himself, and somehow, that honesty drew his team closer than ever. Yet it was in the quiet that followed the storm that the most unexpected thing happened. Early that morning, as I was about to leave the office, the news came. Louis Monroe had been found dead in a rented apartment in southern Manhattan. The preliminary report said overdose. But neither Dominic nor I believed it. Dominic's reaction wasn't what I expected. There was no rage, no shock, only a sorrow so contained it seemed to hum beneath the surface. He once told me, Dominic murmured that night as we sat on the balcony, that one day my past would become too heavy to carry, and when I finally let it go, he'd be the last one laughing. I looked at him. And have you let it go? No. He turned toward me, eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. Because you're the only reason I still hold on to what's human in me. The news of Louise's death barely made the papers, just a few brief lines. No mention of Dominic or Rousseau development. But Rosa knew. I knew. And Dominic never looked away again. After that, he did something no one expected. He called a private meeting with only 12 people, those who had known Julia, worked with her, or once seen the little drawing that had birthed an empire. In the small conference room, Dominic stood, holding a color copy of Julia's sketch. "This is where we began," he said, his voice steady but threaded with emotion. "And if we have to rebuild, I want to start from here." No one spoke. Rosa wiped her tears. I reached beneath the table and took Dominic's hand. A week later, Dominic announced that the entire Red Hook project would be rebuilt, according to Julia's original design, unaltered for market demands. Untouched by compromise. The press called it a brave act out of season. The people called it hope. Finally placed where it belonged. That night, Dominic and I returned to Tribeca, exhausted but lighter than we had been in months. He stood by the glass wall, watching the city. "There are things we can't fix. Olivia," he said quietly, "some consequences come late, but they don't hurt any less." I stepped beside him, resting my head against his shoulder. "And some consequences bring new chances. A chance to love not as a contract, but as a choice." Dominic said nothing, only tightened his hand around mine. And there, above a city still scarred but breathing, we stood learning, quietly, how to forgive what couldn't be changed, and how to cherish what still remained. In autumn, the Tribeca apartment took on an unusual stillness, as if its stone and glass walls had learned to step back, making room for something softer that was beginning to grow between two people who had spent years living within their own boundaries. Dominic no longer opened his laptop the moment he woke. He made coffee for both of us, sometimes smiling faintly when he saw me half awake. My hair a mess, my eyes barely open. There were mornings when we ate breakfast without mentioning work, without talking about the drawings, without recalling the names Louis or Ricci, just two people in a sun-washed kitchen, learning how to exist beside each other, without defenses. Yet the real walls had not fully fallen. They had only cracked, waiting for one final touch. It came on a rainy night. When I returned late from a meeting with the Red Hook community group, I opened the door and found Dominic sitting alone in his office. The lights off, only the city glow filtering through the window. On the desk lay an old photograph I had never seen Julia standing beside their mother, holding a camera, her smile bright as sunlight. Dominic looked at it, as if touching it could bring time back. I stepped closer. Silent. He didn't turn. My mother was the first person who believed in me. He said softly, almost to himself. She used to tell me that if you do something with your whole heart, even failure won't leave you with regret. But I wasn't there the night of the accident. I was at a college party. I never said goodbye. I placed my hand lightly on his back. Barely a whisper of touch. You still had Julia, I said. I did, he murmured. Shoulders tense. I heard her crying on the phone. I promised I'd come right away. But I was too late. And my father. He left her there on the living room floor with a cold towel and a lie that an ambulance was coming. When I arrived, she wasn't breathing anymore. I couldn't hold back. I wrapped my arms around him from behind, feeling his body tremble not from cold, but from something breaking open inside. You've lived with that for all these years, I whispered. And still, you built something out of the wreckage. No one has the right to demand perfection from you. Dominic turned and pulled me into his arms, holding me as if letting go would make him shatter. I'm not afraid of men like Ricci, he murmured into my hair. I'm afraid that one day you'll see everything and walk away. I stepped back just enough to meet his eyes. I've seen it, I said, and I'm still here. Not because I can't see your pain, but because I believe we can live beyond it. That was the first time Dominic cried. Not the dramatic, furious kind of tears, but the quiet, releasing kind that carry truth. The walls he had built around himself didn't collapse from force, they dissolved because, finally, he allowed himself to remove them, brick by brick, and I stood there beside him not to fix, but to remind him that love is not salvation. It is staying. The next morning, Dominic came out of his office with a different face, calm, unburdened. He said he would step back from some meetings, letting Rosa handle the major deals. He wanted time to rebuild from the inside. I didn't ask what he meant. I only knew that for the first time. Dominic Russo was no longer living for what he had lost, but for what he still had the power to keep. And the first thing on that list was me. A week after the night, Dominic let everything inside him fall apart in front of me. I received a strange email from Rosa with the subject line, "Contract for review. Urgent." The attachment was a single-page PDF. I opened it, and for a few seconds, my heart stopped. The first line read, "Lifetime partnership agreement between Dominic Russo and Olivia Blake, effective upon mutual consent, requiring no signatures, only eye contact." Below it were clauses unlike any legal document I had ever seen. Clause 1. Both parties agree to listen before judging, even when the other remains silent. Clause 2. Each has the right to be vulnerable without fear of being abandoned. Clause 3. Past failures may never be used as evidence in future arguments. My hands trembled as I reached the final line. Addendum. If either party feels uncertain, they may withdraw, provided they give 3 days' notice, allowing the other to prepare their heart and promise not to hold resentment. I laughed through stinging tears. Dominic Russo, the man who once ran an empire on the city's most airtight contracts, had just written the most fragile document of his life. A promise without lawyers, without penalties, built solely on trust. That afternoon, I walked into his office with a printed copy in hand. Dominic was standing by the window, looking out at the street as if wondering whether he had gone too far with his joke. I placed the paper on his desk. "I have a few edits," I said calmly. Dominic raised an eyebrow, half amused, half concerned. Clause 1 should add that each party must take responsibility for their own emotions and never use silence as a weapon. He nodded. Intrigued. Fair. Clause 2 should clarify that vulnerability doesn't mean dependence. Each must still keep their own identity. Dominic stepped closer, taking the paper. "You're treating this like a multi-million-dollar negotiation," he teased. I looked up at him, my heartbeat quickening, because I know this one is worth far more. For a moment he said nothing, then gently set the paper down and pulled me closer. "I used to think love made people weak," he murmured, "but when you came into my life, you taught me that real strength begins the moment we dare to love." I rested my forehead against his chest, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat steady, certain, like a symphony meant for two. "So," I whispered, "do you agree to the revised terms?" Dominic leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. "I agree. No signature needed, only your eyes." And in that instant, inside a glass-walled office high above the city without flowers, rings, or vows, Dominic Russo and Olivia Blake signed a new kind of contract, not in ink, but in trust rebuilt from the ruins, a contract no one witnessed, yet one the whole world would feel whenever they saw us walking hand in hand, saying nothing at all, because the most sacred things in life don't need binding. They only need faith and love. That morning, rain fell softly over New York, each drop tracing slow paths down the glass of the Tribeca windows, as if to remind us that beauty doesn't need sunlight to begin. Dominic woke before me. On the pillow he left a small note, just 3 words, "Wear white." I smiled, needing no explanation, no confirmation. Some invitations speak only when the heart is ready to hear them. I chose the simplest white dress I owned, not lace or jeweled, not a wedding gown, but silk that touched the skin gently, like breath. Dominic waited for me in the lobby. No flowers, no groomsmen, only eyes brighter than any light in the city. We walked, hand in hand, to a place I would never have expected, the covered terrace behind the Red Hook site, the place where Julia's design had once been stolen, where plans had fallen apart, and where we had first begun to fight back together. A blown-up version of the drawing hung in the center. 2 neat rows of chairs on either side. No guests. No cameras, only Rosa, seated at the front, her gaze carrying the calm of someone who was part witness, part mother, part friend. Dominic took my hands. There was no officiant, no script, but a folded piece of paper in his pocket. He opened it, his voice steady, low, like the breath of a city not yet awake. "I vow never to promise what I can't keep. I won't promise to always be right, but I promise to always be honest. I won't promise to always be strong, but I promise never to hide behind silence when I'm in pain." I watched him, my heartbeat slowing, every second stretched tenderly thin. Dominic held my gaze, memorizing. "I vow not to love you the way people write about in magazines or act out in films. I'll love you the way a man who's lost everything learns to protect what remains, not because you are the light, but because you walked into the darkest part of me and didn't turn away." I didn't hold any paper. I didn't need one. The vows had long lived inside my heart. I vow not to love you because you're perfect. I love you because you dared to break and still chose to rebuild. I won't keep you as a prize. I'll walk beside you as a companion, someone who believes no one should have to cross this life alone. Dominic's grip tightened, his eyes unblinking. My voice trembled, but stayed firm. "I won't promise to walk with you for life, because life isn't ours to guarantee, but I promise that for every day I wake beside you, I will choose to love you again." Rosa approached. No bouquet, no music, no applause, just a nod, her eyes glistening. "Then," she said softly, smiling, "you are no longer 2. Dominic pulled me into his arms there, in that quiet place, beneath the fine rain, before the unfinished drawing of a once-broken dream, and for the first time, I understood vows don't need cathedrals or diamonds, witnesses or orchestras. A real vow is when you've seen the other person bear with all their past, their scars, their shadows, and you still choose to stay, and to love. And Dominic Russo, the man who had walked alone through so many seasons of loss, finally learned how to hold someone's hand without fear of losing them. Because that day, he understood the truest things in this world don't need to be locked by law or title. They endure through trust and through the vow no one hears except the heart it was made for. 2 months after we spoke our vows beneath the rain at Red Hook, Dominic took me back to where everything had begun, the Astoria Hotel. The last time I stood there, I wore the burgundy dress Richard Langston had insisted on, the one that drained the light from my eyes. I had walked into that grand lobby believing, however faintly, that love would hold me. and walked out shattered when I saw the man I once called my fiancé with another woman's hand in his. Dominic knew all of this. So when he said we should return to the Astoria, I simply looked at him for a long while, no nod, no refusal. But in the end, I put on the cream-white dress he had chosen for me, lighter than mist and soft as forgiveness. He reserved a table in the same section as before, near the window, overlooking the avenue, where streetlights blended with the faint hum of jazz from the ceiling speakers. But this time there were no pitying glances from waiters, no judging eyes from the elegantly dressed guests. This time I was not the woman left behind. I was the woman walking beside a man who knew exactly whose hand he was holding. Dominic pulled out my chair, waited for me to sit before taking his own. He didn't say much, yet his gaze was warmer than every light in that room. "I used to hate this place," he said quietly, "because it reminded me of vanity, of deals without honesty. But I realized it's not the place that poisons us. It's how we walk into it." I smiled, fingertips brushing the rim of my wineglass. "And this time, you walked in with someone who doesn't have to pretend, someone who doesn't have to wear the wrong dress or smile through the wrong pain." Dominic studied me. "Olivia, that night when I saw you standing alone in the lobby, your eyes trying to stay strong while everything around you was breaking, I knew there was something about you that was painfully real and rare. I used to hate it too." I whispered, "Not because of Richard, but because of myself. I let others choose everything for me, the dress, the words, the feelings, but not anymore." Dominic nodded, then reached into his pocket. It wasn't a ring. It was a small silver keychain, engraved with Julia's name on one side and, on the other, the date we met at the Astoria. "I want us to remember," he said, "that what feels like an ending is sometimes only the first page of something new." I held the gift, tears rising without warning. Something closed inside me, not the pain, but the last old door I needed to shut before walking through the one he had quietly opened. When dinner ended, Dominic stood and offered his hand. "Dance with me," I laughed softly. "There's no music. Then we'll make our own." So we danced. Right there in the middle of the lobby. No stage. No crowd to lead us. Just two people who had once been broken, learning how to move again to a rhythm they created themselves. The eyes around us watched, not out of curiosity, but because everyone recognized it that love, when it's real, doesn't need spectacle. It only needs the right person. And when Dominic spun me once and I rested my head on his shoulder, I knew we had come full circle from heartbreak to healing, from loss to beginning, right there, in the same Astoria, where my heart had once been crushed by betrayal. It now beat steadily beside the man who never promised perfection, but kept the one promise that mattered most, that he would never leave when I needed him to stay. A year after we returned to the Astoria, New York mornings still began with the blare of car horns and the city's relentless rhythm. Yet for Dominic and me, each day started with the small but precious rituals: a perfectly brewed cup of coffee, a lingering embrace before leaving the apartment, and a whispered wish for a good day that was never forgotten. We did not hold a grand wedding, nor did we flood social media with staged photographs. Yet, in the rhythm of ordinary life, every shared moment became our longest vow. Dominic continued to lead his company, but he no longer worked 16-hour days. Instead, he devoted time each week to visiting high schools, teaching urban design and telling the students about a little girl named Julia, who had once drawn a dream with her innocent, unpolished lines. I opened a small architecture studio with 2 collaborators and a stray dog we named Astoria, because it had witnessed both the worst and the most beautiful versions of myself. What once seemed impossible had happened not because we were stronger than anyone else, but because we chose to stay when it seemed there was nothing left to hold on to. Our story did not begin with perfection. It began with brokenness. Yet through that fracture, light found a way in. Love, I realized, is not about finding the perfect person from the start. It is about finding someone willing to walk beside you when everything falls apart, and to rebuild together with patience, honesty, and an open heart. Today, this story is not merely a romance. It is a journey of forgiveness, healing, and transcending the boundaries of the past to trust that goodness remains. If this story has touched a part of your heart, click subscribe, like, and share to spread the feeling and faith in love, life, and rebirth after pain. Don't forget to leave a comment sharing your own reflections. Have you ever stood on the line between loss and choosing to stay? And if you were Olivia or Dominic, what might you have done differently? We long to hear your stories straight from the heart, because somewhere in your words, someone else might find their own path forward. Thank you for listening and joining us on this emotional journey. Remember to follow the YouTube channel, Underworld Love Stories, for more moving, surprising, and inspiring tales of love every day. We'll see you in the next video, with a new story, a new heart, and perhaps a new light for you. Wishing you health, peace of mind, and the gentle joy of finding a reason to smile each day. Goodbye, and see you in the next story.